Far beyond the reaches of human civilization, on a planet bathed in a dim red sun, there existed a species known as the Zaori. They were small, fragile, and physically weak. Their bones were thin, their muscles barely adequate to support their slender bodies, and their minds, though sharp, lacked the strength to match the strength of their bodies. For centuries, they had been prey to the larger, more powerful species in the galaxy. The Zaori had learned to live in the shadows, always avoiding confrontation, always looking for a way to escape before their enemies could strike. They had become masters of survival, but nothing more. They were a race that had long accepted their place at the bottom of the galaxy's hierarchy, their existence defined by fear and weakness. It was on one of their most desperate days that the humans first made contact. The Zaori had no idea what to expect when they saw the humans approaching, their ships cutting through the atmosphere with the speed of a comet. The humans were unlike anything the Zaori had ever encountered before. Tall, strong, and with an energy that seemed to flow from them like a powerful current, they were everything the Zaori were not. The humans didn't come as conquerors, as many had expected, but as teachers. They arrived with a message of hope, hope for the Zaori, who had long given up on the idea of ever becoming anything more than weak prey in the galaxy. The humans, having seen potential in the Zaori, offered to help them train. It was an offer the Zaori couldn't refuse. They had nothing to lose, and perhaps, just perhaps, something to gain. At first, the Zaori were skeptical. They had been taught to believe that strength and power were not something that could be learned. They had seen species far more powerful than themselves fall to the might of other races, and they thought that the humans' offer was too good to be true. Still, there was something about the humans' presence that made the Zaori curious. There was a calm confidence in the humans that the Zaori had never seen before, and the idea of breaking free from their fearful existence intrigued them. With hesitation, they agreed to the humans' offer, not knowing what lay ahead. The training began slowly. At first, the Zaori struggled to keep up. Their bodies were not built for the kind of physical exertion the humans demanded. They were exhausted, aching, and on the brink of giving up more times than they could count. The humans didn't give them any special treatment. They pushed the Zaori harder, expecting more from them every day. The Zaori had never known such intensity. Their bodies protested, and their minds screamed for them to stop. But the humans never gave in. They pushed them further, urging them to dig deeper into themselves, to reach parts of their spirit they never thought existed. The Zaori began to realize that their true challenge was not physical strength, but mental strength. The human trainers didn't just focus on physical training. They taught the Zaori how to think like warriors. They showed them how to use their minds as weapons, to strategize, to plan, and to adapt. The Zaori were quick learners, faster than anyone had expected. While their bodies were still weak compared to other species, their minds were sharp, and they could grasp complex concepts in moments. They learned how to work as a team, how to use their environment to their advantage, and how to exploit the weaknesses of their enemies. The human trainers were impressed by how quickly the Zaori picked up on tactics, and they realized that their greatest strength would not lie in their muscle, but in their intelligence and creativity. With the humans' help, the Zaori began to unlock their true potential. But as the Zaori trained harder, they began to understand the truth about their situation. They were not just learning to survive. They were being molded into warriors. The humans saw something in them, something that the Zaori had never believed existed. They had the potential to be far more than weaklings. The humans, through their harsh training and belief in the Zaori's ability to overcome their own limitations, had planted a seed of determination in the Zaori. They would no longer be the weakest species in the galaxy. They would become something stronger, something unstoppable. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The Zaori knew they had a long way to go before they could face the challenges ahead, but they no longer feared failure. They had learned to push through their pain, to fight through their doubts, and to trust in their ability to grow. Months passed, and the changes in the Zayori were undeniable. Their bodies, though still not as strong as the other species, were now lean and toned. Their endurance had increased dramatically. They could run for hours without tiring. Their muscles no longer screamed in protest when they exerted themselves. But more importantly, their minds had become sharper, more focused. They had learned the importance of patience, of timing, and of using their enemies' strengths against them. The humans had taught them that strength was not just about physical might. It was about control, about outthinking the enemy, about staying calm under pressure. The Zayori had learned to think like the humans, to act with precision and purpose. The day came when they would face their first real test. A neighboring alien race, the Teknar, had attacked their world before, raiding their cities, taking what they wanted, and leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. This time, the Zayori were ready. They were no longer the frightened species cowering in the shadows. They had been transformed. As the Teknar approached, they were met with an entirely different Zayori force. The Zayori didn't charge in blindly. Instead, they used the knowledge they had gained from their training to strike strategically. They set traps, used the terrain to their advantage, and worked together as a cohesive unit. The Teknar, who had once easily overwhelmed the Zayori, were now being outsmarted at every turn. The battle raged on, and though the Zayori were still smaller, still not as physically powerful as the Teknar, they fought with something more. They fought with intelligence, with teamwork, and with the heart of a species that had learned to defy their own limitations. In the end, the Zayori won. Against all odds, they pushed the Teknar back, defending their homeworld with a ferocity that shocked their enemies. It was a victory that would echo across the galaxy. The Zayori had once been seen as the weakest, the most fragile species in the universe, but now, thanks to the humans' guidance and their own hard work, they had proven that no species, no matter how weak, was truly powerless. The Zayori had become something far greater than anyone had expected, an unstoppable force, not because of their strength, but because they had learned to harness their true potential. The humans had given them the tools, but the Zayori had discovered something even more powerful, the will to rise above, to push beyond their limits, and to become more than they ever believed possible. The first day of training was a shock to the Zayori. No one could have prepared them for the grueling tasks ahead. Under the watchful eyes of their human trainers, the Zayori were pushed beyond their limits in ways they had never imagined. The humans didn't believe in soft words or encouragement. Their approach was firm, direct, and relentless. For the Zayori, who had never been forced to face such intensity, it felt like the beginning of an impossible journey. But there was something about the way the humans carried themselves, an aura of quiet strength that inspired a flicker of hope in the Zayori. They had never encountered a species with such confidence, and in that confidence, they saw the possibility of change. The Zayori's first test came early on. The humans led them through a series of physical exercises designed to break them, to make them question their own strength. The Zayori were told to run, climb, and endure obstacles that seemed impossible for their frail bodies. The very air felt heavy, thick with exhaustion, as their legs burned with every step. They stumbled, gasped for breath, and yet the humans stood there, watching without a hint of sympathy. "You can do better," one of the human trainers said, his voice cold and steady. It wasn't cruel, it was just truth, and that truth was something the Zayori had never encountered before. For the first time in their lives, they were told that they were capable of more, that their limits could be pushed. For days, the training continued without mercy. The Zayori were not allowed to rest unless instructed. Every muscle in their bodies screamed as they endured harsh physical drills, sprinting for miles, lifting weights that seemed far too heavy for them. Their bodies ached in ways they didn't know were possible. And yet, they didn't stop. The human trainers would not allow it. When a Zayori collapsed, another was immediately called to take their place. There was no room for weakness, no space for failure. But as the days passed, something began to shift within them. Each time they thought they couldn't go any further, their bodies found new reserves of strength, pushing past their limitations. The humans were teaching them something more than just physical endurance. They were teaching them how to push through the pain, how to find the strength within themselves that they didn't even know existed. One morning, as the Zaori dragged themselves through another punishing run, one of the human trainers gathered them around. He was tall, his voice commanding, yet there was something in his eyes that showed understanding. He knew how much they had already endured. "You're not here to just survive," he said. "You're here to change. You're here to become more than what you've always believed yourself to be. Strength is not just in your muscles. It's in your mind, in your will to keep going, even when you want to quit." The words struck deep. For the first time, the Zaori began to realize that the human trainers weren't just focusing on their physical bodies. The real challenge was mental. Their bodies, as weak as they were, could be trained, but it was their minds that needed the most attention. The Zaori had been taught to be survivors, to hide, to avoid conflict, but now they were learning to fight. They were learning to stand their ground, to face challenges head-on. The training was no longer just about strengthening their bodies. It was about creating a warrior's mindset. As the weeks went by, the Zaori grew accustomed to the relentless pace of their training. They learned how to focus on each task, blocking out the pain and fatigue that used to cripple them. The mental exercises were just as demanding as the physical ones. They practiced strategy, using their intellect to solve complex problems and scenarios. The human trainers taught them how to outthink their enemies, how to find creative solutions to impossible situations. The Zaori, whose minds had once been sharp but lacked direction, now began to see the world differently. They saw possibilities instead of limitations. The humans also taught them the importance of teamwork. The Zaori were not accustomed to working together in this way. Their species had always been solitary, their survival instinct driving them to look out for themselves first. But the humans emphasized that unity was their greatest weapon. The strength of a single Zaori, though improved, was still no match for the power of a group working in unison. The Zaori were taught to trust one another, to rely on each other's strengths. Slowly, they began to form bonds. What had once been a group of individuals was now becoming a team, each Zaori working together, pushing each other forward, supporting one another when the pain became unbearable. One of the most difficult parts of the training was learning to control their fear. The Zaori had always been ruled by fear, the fear of being hunted, the fear of being weak. The human trainers showed them how to use fear, how to turn it into a source of power rather than something to be avoided. "Fear is not your enemy," the human instructor told them one day. "It's a signal. It tells you where you need to focus. Use it. Let it sharpen you." The Zaori, though frightened at first, began to realize that fear wasn't something to run from. It was something to embrace. It gave them clarity, helped them focus on the task at hand. The more they learned to control their fear, the stronger they became. They started to act with purpose, with resolve. As the training intensified, the Zaori started to see changes in themselves. Their bodies were no longer weak. They had developed strength that surprised even them. They could now run for hours without tiring, lift heavier weights than they ever thought possible, and endure long, brutal drills with a stamina that would have been unimaginable just weeks before. But it wasn't just their bodies that had transformed. Their minds had sharpened as well. They had become more confident, more decisive. They no longer hesitated in the face of challenges. When the human trainers gave them a task, they took it on without fear or doubt. They had learned to trust themselves, and trust was the key to their success. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult training exercise, a human trainer approached one of the Zaori, a young male who had struggled the most during the early days. The trainer, noticing the Zaori's exhaustion, offered him a rare moment of encouragement. "You've come a long way," the human said, his voice soft but filled with respect. "You were weak when you started, but you've shown that you're not afraid to push through." That's the strength we're looking for. Not just physical strength, but the will to never give up. The young Zayori's heart swelled with pride. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was more than just a survivor. He was becoming a warrior. The training didn't stop when they reached their physical limits. It didn't stop when their bodies were tired and their minds overwhelmed. The humans continued to challenge them, continuing to test their endurance, their strength, and their willpower. The Zayori began to understand that the journey they had started was not just about becoming stronger physically. It was about learning to overcome the impossible, to face every challenge with the confidence that they could win. And though they had only begun their journey, the Zayori knew, deep down, that they were becoming unstoppable. The training had only just begun, but the humans had already shown them what they were truly capable of. The day of the first test had arrived, and the air around the Zayori was thick with anticipation. They had spent weeks training under the unforgiving eyes of their human instructors, pushing themselves through pain and exhaustion. Now, standing at the edge of a vast, barren field, the Zayori were about to face their first real challenge. The humans had warned them that this test would be different. It wouldn't be like the training exercises they had grown accustomed to. This test would show whether they had truly transformed, or whether they were still the weak, fragile species they had been when they first began. The test ground was a vast, open area, with no shelter, no cover, just a wide, unforgiving stretch of land. There was no place to hide, and no room for mistakes. At the far end of the field stood a massive, heavily armored vehicle, the kind that Zayori had only seen from a distance during the most dangerous battles in their history. This was the test, and it would push them beyond anything they had ever faced before. The human trainers stood at the sidelines, watching with unwavering focus. They knew what was at stake. This was not just a test of physical strength. It was a test of everything the Zayori had learned. Their survival, their very future as a species, depended on how they performed. If they succeeded, they would be one step closer to becoming the unstoppable warriors the humans believed they could be. But if they failed, it would mean a return to the old ways, a life of weakness and fear. The stakes had never been higher. As the Zayori were lined up at the starting point, a single word echoed across the field. Go! The sound of it cut through the air, sharp and commanding. Without hesitation, the Zayori surged forward. Their bodies, once frail and slow, now moved with purpose and speed. They had trained for this moment, and they were ready. Their legs burned with each step, but they pushed on, ignoring the fatigue that threatened to slow them down. They were no longer just survivors. They were warriors now, and warriors never stopped fighting. The first obstacle came into view, a series of high walls, towering over them, each one seemingly more impossible to scale than the last. The Zayori's hearts pounded as they reached the base of the first wall. It was a massive barrier, much higher than anything they had ever encountered during their training. For a moment, doubt crept into their minds. Could they really do this? But the human trainer's words rang in their ears. No room for weakness. They had learned that lesson well. One by one, they began to climb. Their fingers scraped against the rough surfaces of the walls, their arms aching with the effort. They had never been this high before, never pushed themselves this far. The ground seemed so far away, and with every inch they gained, the fear of falling grew. But they kept going, driven by the one thing they had learned to rely on, their will. They reached the top of the first wall, breathless but triumphant, and scrambled down the other side. There was no time to celebrate. The next challenge was already waiting. As they continued through the course, the obstacles grew more dangerous. They encountered pits filled with sharp spikes and barriers that forced them to leap across wide gaps. The Zayori had to think fast, their reflexes honed from months of brutal training. They had to leap, crawl, and dodge with speed and precision. The sound of their hearts pounding in their chests was drowned out by the roar of wind in their ears as they raced toward the next challenge. The test was relentless. There was no pause, no moment to catch their breath. Each obstacle tested them in different ways: strength, agility, speed, and above all, mental toughness. At one point, a section of the course required them to navigate a maze of moving platforms. The Zayori had to leap from one platform to another, but the platforms were constantly shifting, making it nearly impossible to predict where the next safe landing would be. It was a challenge that demanded perfect timing, nerves of steel, and unwavering confidence. One of the Zayori, a female who had always been hesitant in training, faltered for a moment. Her feet slipped, and for a heartbeat, it looked like the Zayori were learning something profound about themselves with each obstacle. They were discovering that they could endure more than they ever thought possible. The pain, the exhaustion, it didn't matter. The humans had trained them to push past it, to keep moving even when every muscle screamed for rest. They were no longer the same species that had once cowered in fear. They were becoming something more. As they neared the end of the course, the final challenge loomed before them: a series of enemy combatants. These combatants were humans, but they were not there to play games. They were there to fight. The Zayori had been trained to battle, but now they would face a real opponent. The sight of the combatants, armed and ready, sent a shiver of fear through them. This was the ultimate test of everything they had learned. The humans watched closely, waiting to see how the Zayori would respond. The Zayori paused for a moment, their hearts racing. They had never faced such a direct threat before. But then, just as they had been trained, they charged. There was no hesitation this time. No second-guessing. Each Zayori used the skills they had honed over the past weeks: speed, agility, strength, and strategy. They fought not just to survive, but to win. Their blows were sharp and decisive, their movements coordinated, as they worked together as a unit, something they had never done before. The combatants fought back fiercely, but the Zayori were relentless. They had come too far to fail now. The Zayori fought with everything they had, and in the end, they emerged victorious. They had passed the test, not just as individuals, but as a team. The humans stood at the sidelines, watching in silence, their expressions unreadable. But as the last combatant was subdued, one of the trainers nodded approvingly. "Well done," he said. "You've proven that you can be more than what you were, but this is only the beginning." The Zayori, panting and exhausted, looked at each other. They had passed their first test, but they knew that the journey had just begun. The humans had shown them what they were capable of, and they had seen it for themselves. They were no longer a weak, powerless species. They were warriors, and nothing would stop them now. The galaxy was vast, its reaches stretching beyond what most could comprehend. For centuries, the different species that inhabited it lived in their own ways, unaware of the quiet shifts that were happening deep within its core. But all of that changed when the humans arrived. Before they came, the galaxy was a place where the strongest dictated the fate of the weaker species. Peace was a rarity, and conflict was constant. Yet the arrival of humans, with their strange ways and unwavering will, altered everything. When the humans first landed on the outskirts of the Tylon system, no one took them seriously. They were small in number, and their technology was primitive compared to the mighty warships and colossal cities that dominated the galaxy. The Tylon were an ancient race, proud and strong, with no real enemies that could challenge them. They looked down on the humans, dismissing them as nothing more than a fleeting curiosity. But what they failed to realize was that humans were not just another species to conquer or ignore. They were something else entirely. It all began when a group of humans, under the banner of their commander, began offering the Tylon something they had never known before: knowledge. The Tylon, who had long relied on their superior strength and advanced weapons, were intrigued. The humans spoke of unity, of teaching the value of cooperation, of sharing knowledge that would elevate not just individuals, but entire species. The Tylon were skeptical, but curious enough to listen. What they did not expect was that the humans' words would shake their very foundation. Over time, the Tylon began to notice changes. small at first, but undeniable. The humans did not conquer with weapons, they conquered with ideas. Years passed, and the Tylon began to train under the humans. It wasn't about learning how to fight better or build stronger ships. It was about learning to think differently. The humans taught them patience, the ability to plan for the future, and the strength found in unity rather than fear. Slowly, the Tylon transformed. They became more than just a powerful race. They became a race that understood the true power of knowledge and cooperation. The Tylon were no longer the rulers of the galaxy. They were evolving into something greater, something unexpected. However, the changes didn't go unnoticed. The other species of the galaxy, watching from afar, saw what the humans were doing. Some feared it, while others saw an opportunity. The Draxians, a ruthless warlike species known for their fierce battles, viewed the humans' influence over the Tylon as a threat to their dominance. They had no interest in unity or peaceful coexistence. Their only focus was control. As the Tylon grew stronger, the Draxians saw their own power begin to wane. They could not stand for it. The Draxians made their move, attacking the Tylon colonies with ruthless precision. They underestimated the Tylon's newfound strength, however. The Tylon fought back with a ferocity they had never known before. No longer were they just defending their lands. They were defending an idea they had learned from the humans, the power of cooperation. The Tylon did not fight alone. They united with the humans, who had been preparing them for just such a moment. And when the battle ended, the Tylon and the humans stood victorious, proving that strength alone was not enough to win the galaxy. The Draxians, defeated but not destroyed, retreated into the far reaches of the galaxy, their confidence shattered. The Tylon, with their newfound allies, had created something that no one had expected, a united front. And the ripple effects were felt far beyond the Tylon system. Other species, once skeptical, began to look at the humans and the Tylon with new eyes. The notion that unity and knowledge could defeat power and force spread like wildfire. As the years passed, the humans' influence spread across the galaxy. Species who had once been at war with one another now sought peace. The galaxy, which had once been a battlefield, slowly transformed into a place where cooperation and mutual respect were the new currency. The humans, though small in number, had managed to change the very fabric of the galaxy. They had taught the Tylon the importance of thinking beyond just power, and in turn, the Tylon had shared that lesson with others. The result was a galaxy that had been irrevocably changed. But even with the peace that was slowly taking root, there were still those who resisted. Some species had no interest in unity. They had lived for centuries in isolation, proud of their independence, unwilling to let go of the old ways. These species saw the changes happening around them and feared that they would lose their place in the galaxy. Some attempted to challenge the new order, thinking they could return to the old ways of war and dominance. But the humans and their allies were ready. Every time a species tried to break the peace, they were met with a swift and united response. As the galaxy continued to shift, the humans stood at the center of it all. Their message had been clear from the start. It wasn't about who was strongest or most powerful. It was about who could work together. The Tylon had learned that, and so had countless other species. The galaxy was no longer a place of constant war. It was a place where ideas had the power to change everything. In the years that followed, the human presence in the galaxy only grew. They had once been seen as weak, a species that would be easily forgotten. But now, their influence was undeniable. The galaxy had changed, and it was all because of the simple but profound lessons the humans had taught. That strength was not just measured by weapons and armies, but by the ability to work together, to learn from one another, and to build a future that was stronger than any individual could ever be. And so, the galaxy that had once been ruled by power alone was now a galaxy of cooperation, of shared knowledge, and of a united future. It was a galaxy that had been changed forever by the humans, and they had no intention of letting it return to the way it once was. For they knew that the true power of the galaxy lay not in the strength of any single species, but in the strength of all of them, working together. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, many species had once thought themselves unbeatable, rulers of their own domains. Each species believed they had discovered the secret to dominance, whether through sheer military power, overwhelming numbers, or advanced technology. But none of them had ever faced what was coming. The humans, a small species from a distant, unknown world, had been quietly watching and learning. They were not the strongest, nor were they the most technologically advanced, but they had something no other species had ever truly grasped: the ability to adapt, unite, and turn their weaknesses into strengths. This would be the beginning of something the galaxy had never seen before: an unstoppable alliance. The story began on a cold, quiet day in the Andromeda cluster. The Tylon, a once mighty race of warriors, had been growing stronger under the guidance of the humans. The Tylon had always relied on their brute strength and fierce fighting skills, but they had never known the power of unity. Their empire, once one of the most feared in the galaxy, had started to decline as new powers arose. The humans, always underestimated, had been instrumental in their transformation, teaching them that there was more to power than just physical might. The Tylon had learned that intelligence, strategy, and cooperation were the true keys to victory. But just as they began to understand this truth, a new threat emerged, one that could destroy everything they had worked so hard to build. The Draxians, a brutal and merciless species, had been watching from the shadows. For years, they had been biding their time, observing the rise of the humans and the Tylon alliance. They saw the humans as a threat to their own ambitions. They were a species that had always relied on fear, domination, and war to maintain control. They saw the unity that was growing among the galaxy's species as a weakness that needed to be crushed before it spread further. Without warning, the Draxians launched an attack on the Tylon homeworld, their massive warships descending from the sky like a swarm of locusts. The Tylon were caught off guard. Despite their new knowledge, they were still outnumbered, and the Draxians' superior firepower was overwhelming. It seemed as if the Tylon might not survive this new threat, but what the Draxians did not expect was the arrival of the humans. The humans, though small in number, had a secret weapon: their ability to inspire, to rally others to their cause. They didn't need to outgun the Draxians, they needed to outsmart them. The humans reached out to the other species across the galaxy, calling for help, promising that together they could defeat the Draxians and ensure that peace would prevail. At first, many species were hesitant. They had long been wary of the humans' methods. Some believed the Tylon would fail, and the humans would be nothing more than a fleeting spark. Others simply didn't want to get involved in a war that seemed like it was not their own. But the humans persisted, using their innate understanding of psychology to appeal to the species' better nature. They offered cooperation, not just in military strength, but in knowledge, technology, and shared resources. Slowly but surely, the humans began to form an alliance, a vast, interconnected network of species, each contributing its strengths to the cause. The first battle was fierce. The Draxians, confident in their superior strength, initially crushed the Alliance's forces with ease. But what they did not account for was the humans' tactics. The humans didn't fight like the Draxians. They didn't charge into battle with brute force. They fought with strategy. They attacked weak points, misdirected the enemy, and used every advantage they had. The Tylon, learning from the humans, had reorganized their military tactics, using their strength in ways that made them more formidable than ever before. The other species, each with their own unique skills and knowledge, worked together, covering each other's weaknesses and creating a force that was greater than the sum of its parts. Despite their initial success, the Draxians soon realized that they were facing something they hadn't encountered before: a true alliance. And that was when the tide began to turn. The Draxians, notorious for their ruthless nature, were used to ruling by fear and dominance. but they had never had to face a united front like this. The Alliance, led by the humans and Tylon, fought back harder and smarter with each passing day. They didn't just fight to protect their homes. They fought for something greater: peace, unity, and the future of the galaxy. The second wave of the Draxian assault was even more devastating. They brought in reinforcements, and their warships darkened the skies. Yet, for every wave they sent, the Alliance grew stronger. The humans' ability to adapt, the Tylon's newfound strategy, and the support of the other species. It wasn't just the military might that defeated the Draxians. It was the power of the Alliance's unity. Each species brought something unique to the table. The Nazari, with their advanced medical technology, kept the wounded fighters in top condition. The Ixar, with their unparalleled knowledge of energy manipulation, powered the Alliance's weapons with unmatched precision. The Cretan, skilled in stealth and subterfuge, infiltrated the Draxian fleets, causing chaos behind enemy lines. And the humans, who had once been seen as weak, provided the glue that held everything together. Their ability to inspire, to unite, and to adapt to any situation. As the battle raged on, the Draxians found themselves retreating, cornered, and desperate. The once feared conquerors who had sought to crush the galaxy under their boot were now on the run. The Alliance pushed them back, reclaiming system after system, until the Draxians were forced to surrender. Their defeat was not just a military one. It was a victory for unity, for cooperation, and for the belief that strength lay in working together rather than in division. The galaxy was forever changed. What had once seemed impossible, an alliance of species who had once been enemies, rivals, or strangers, had not only withstood the Draxian onslaught, but had emerged victorious. The humans, with their unyielding will to unite, had shown the galaxy that no force was too great when individuals came together for a common cause. The Draxians, their power broken, were forced to rethink their ways, while the rest of the galaxy began to rebuild, stronger than ever before. From that day forward, the Alliance stood as an example to the galaxy, a shining beacon that, no matter how dark the times, unity could overcome even the greatest of challenges. And the humans, once thought to be nothing more than a small, insignificant species, had proven that sometimes the smallest spark can ignite the greatest change. The galaxy would never be the same again.